I've been in ministry 50 plus years. At the very outset, though, I would like to say that I've met with a number of priests who are very gentle, sensitive, decent gentlemen. And I have worked with them and been inspired and influenced by them. But these are few. In my experience in ministry, which has been mostly in villages, I have encountered clericalism and clerical attitudes in many different ways. Let me begin with some of my encounters with bishops. Several years ago, I was in a big city. We were in the jurisdiction of a big parish which had about 6 priests. I was a young sister then. We were expected to come for the distribution of communion on Sundays. There were several masses starting from 6 right up to 10:30 in the morning. We had to walk a distance of about 10 minutes to reach the church. And then there were 2 masses in the evening. It was rather heavy for us because we were all in active ministry, in school, in the social center. Several of us were studying. And Sunday was the only free day. And yet it was all taken up with this distribution of communion. What incensed us was we saw that the priests, there was only one priest celebrating Mass, all the others were in their rooms watching TV. So when we had an opportunity, when the bishop visited, we told him about our difficulty. He said, well, he'll look into it. When he was leaving, 3 of us accompanied him. And as we were reaching him up to the gate, he turned around and told us, he said, sisters, you know, there was a time when women were not allowed to touch the sacred species. Now you are allowed. And you women are complaining. On another occasion, it was our feast, 15th of September, Our Lady of Sorrows. And we had a bishop to celebrate the Mass for us. And I was assigned to give the introduction. In my introduction, what I said in a very few words, was that I saw Mary as a strong woman. And that was the Mary who inspired me. She suffered and stood strong in her suffering. After Mass, I was called by the bishop. And he told me that what I said was not theologically correct. And I wondered, if I had said, Mary said yes, perhaps that would have been theologically correct. What was theologically not okay in saying that I was inspired by Mary, the mother of Jesus, who I saw as a strong woman. And the last encounter with the bishop, which was just about 3 years ago, mind you, in this century, 21st century, I was in a village and the bishop was on a so-called pastoral visit. He wanted to meet, you know, the people in the ministries. In the villages we run hostels. And this was a middle school hostel. We had some 40, 50 girls, age between 9 to about 12, 13, middle school. Well, we called them to meet the bishop, and they filed past him, and as they were coming, he put out his hand, and very naturally they shook his hand. After it was over, he sent for the sister who was in charge of the hostel, and he told her, he said, sister, you have to teach your children that when they greet a bishop, they should kiss his ring. Let me come to one of the thorniest issues, particularly for us in the village ministries, the constant, ever-present threat of the Mass being withdrawn. If we don't toe the line, or if for any reason the priest is dissatisfied or upset with us. It happens in 2 ways. One, I would call blackmail or a punishment. And 2, a very lackadaisical attitude on the part of the priest. You know, he'll come if he feels like, or he'll slip on, or sometimes suddenly disappear. In my experience of village work, we did everything. We ran the boarding, we got the funds, we attended to all the needs of the villagers. In addition, we had a health center. We used to have emergencies. We would take the patients to the hospital very often in the night. We drove. We had a vehicle. We would drive ourselves. We sisters would go alone. We did just about everything. But when it came to the Mass, there we were stuck and we were dependent. Having to be dependent on an outside resource, or I would say outside agency for the sacraments, puts us religious women permanently in a very vulnerable situation. Another point is homily abuse. When I say homily abuse, I mean when that sacred space in the liturgy is used to control, to put us down, to talk down to us, to say anything, to settle scores. I see this, I call this hijacking the homily. Another case comes to my mind, interference in the way we sisters dress. Our dress codes. In the 90s, when we faced those attacks from political parties, when sisters were raped, many of us started wearing lay clothes, especially when we were outside. One of our sisters was told by the priest, he says, when we were going for the village mass, don't enter my jeep if you are dressed like that. She was in lay clothes. He insisted that she comes in that she be dressed in the habit. Seminarians are introduced very early in their seminary formation to the clerical culture. Many seminaries have sisters running the kitchen, the laundry, the housekeeping services. And these young men in formation see sisters in positions of servitude from a very early age. In this kind of atmosphere in a seminary, how can we expect that when they are ordained, they will treat women with respect? Sisters who come from a very patriarchal society in some parts of the country find it very difficult to say no. And that's where all the abuse begins. When we say clericalism, we are also part of this whole clerical attitude. It's a collusion, like, so to say, and it affects both ways. And I feel the church is losing a lot. The potential of women, the giftedness that is there in women is not being realized, and it's a loss for society, for the church. And when women's talents are not recognized, everyone suffers. So if we need to move ahead, if we need a church that will take us ahead, we need both men and women, the giftedness of both. So we still have a long way to go, and I hope we are moving in that direction.
Sister Nancy, thank you very much for this very honest and strong testimonial. This year, Voices of Faith has decided to join you in Women's 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. We talk about the various forms of violence women, especially women religious, suffer in the Roman Catholic Church. On 25th November this year, Pope Francis said, "The various forms of abuse suffered by many women are a meanness and a degradation of the human condition and of humanity. We must not look away." However, in the past days, as well as in the days to come, we keep asking again and again, is there any protection for women against violence and abuse in the Roman Catholic Church? Has the Vatican, as well as the local churches, really dedicated themselves to ending violence and abuse against women? Are there results to show? Our campaign Enough shouts out the real pain, anger, and nightmares of these violated women. While preparing these different sessions and listening to the testimonials, I often cry silently. What is this faith institution doing with us women? Yesterday, we heard the testimonial of Anna Adamchikova, a former sister of the Missionaries of Charity. She told us about the suicide of one of her sisters, hanged up herself with her own sari. But on the other side, I feel the change in many Catholic women. The more we speak out about it, the bigger gets our critical thinking. We women need to grow up within our own Catholic identity. I'm also very proud of us women. We overcome the silence. Each day more are speaking up and saying enough. Before we start with the speakers, we will show you our third educational video. It's about spiritual life, spiritual guidance, and confession, the topic of our event today. Doris Reisinger talks in her speech given here last Friday, November 26th, about just 8 of these shockingly common violations of canonical norms that are at the same time hallmarks of abuse in consecrated life. And there might be many more. She said, if there's only one sister who through these videos learns to recognize certain red flags in consecrated life and is empowered to stand up to an abusive superior, we achieved our goal. Likewise, if there's only one superior who realizes that certain long-standing traditions in her community are actually abusive and decides to stop them, or even if there's only one abuser who through this video series refrains from further abuses, then we are extremely satisfied. And Rocio Figueroa, who also contributed immensely to these videos, said this morning, as my husband Steve said, perhaps this is one of the most important projects that I have participated in because it will save lives.
Spirituality is a fundamental part of a consecrated life. It includes common and individual prayer, singing, sacraments, retreats, spiritual reading, and direction. This is all a part of your inner spiritual life and identity. Living in God's presence is the foundation of your life as a religious sister. Your spiritual life is closely linked to what the Second Vatican Council calls a person's most secret core and sanctuary, where you are alone with God, whose voice echoes in your depths. When your spiritual life is well nourished and flourishing, your entire outer life will radiate this. You feel content, confident, balanced, and happy, which has a positive effect on your work and relationships. If, however, your spiritual life is poorly nourished, dehydrated, or constricted, it can reflect in feeling insecure, depressed, or scrupulous. This can also negatively affect your work and relationships. As a religious sister, you have a moral right to good and balanced spiritual nourishment that fits your personal needs and development. You also have a canonically established right to a degree of spiritual freedom, particularly regarding confession, your choice of spiritual director, and the protection of your spiritual intimacy. Let's explore these 3 more. As any other Catholic, you are of course canonically advised to confess grave sins once a year. If you have grave sins to confess, however, only you can know. When and to whom you confess them is entirely your free decision. Neither your novice mistress, nor your superior, nor a priest may give you instructions on this or dictate when and to whom you confess. You are also not obliged to give information about it to anybody. You have a right to choose your own spiritual director. He or she can be a member of your community or not, a priest, a religious, or a lay person. You may choose and change them as you think best. Your superiors may not make this choice for you, and certainly not against your will. Your superiors must not intrude into your spiritual life. It is even canonically forbidden for them to induce manifestation of conscience. It is also forbidden for spiritual directors and confessors to discuss your spiritual life and issues with anyone, including your superiors or fellow sisters. Additionally, if your superiors pressure you to reveal your inner spiritual life, or if they prescribe certain confessors or spiritual directors, you should be aware. If they demand and receive information from your confessor or spiritual director, or even if they present themselves as a spiritual director or confessor to you, this constitutes as spiritual abuse. It violates canon law and is a red flag. Decisions of the superiors must always and only concern the external life of the community, such as apostolates and distribution of tasks. In these things, compromises must be found, and occasionally decisions must be made against the will of individuals. However, when it comes to your inner life, that is what you think and feel, your experience while praying, and how you perceive God and His will in your heart, even your spiritual director cannot decide these things nor demand submission from you. It is because your superiors have external authority over you that canon law forbids them to have a say in your spiritual life, and instead demands a strict separation of external and internal spheres. There must occasionally be obedience in one, however, freedom must reign in the other. Without freedom, there is no spiritual life, and without a spiritual life, religious life is meaningless. Your community should be a place of spiritually nourished sisters with whom you can pray and be spiritually inspired, while still having your spiritual intimacy and personal choices respected.
Now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Sister Nuella de Souza. Welcome. Belongs to a community of women religious, the missionaries of Christ Jesus, and is trained in education, psychotherapy, and counseling. She is actively involved in bringing justice to cases of sexual abuse in the Archdiocese of Mumbai and further afield. Today, she will address the sacramental blackmailing in the Roman Catholic Church from an Indian perspective. Welcome, Nuella.
Thank you, Chantal. Just outside Mumbai, there is a UNESCO World Heritage Site called Elephanta Caves. It's a short ride out by boat, during which you are accompanied by and entertained by flocks of seagulls till you reach the island you are headed for. A mini train ride, and a couple of 100 steps later, you have reached. There are many caves, but in one of the many caves is a sculpture exquisitely hewed out of rock. It is called Teen Murti because it has 3 faces, and it tells the story of Shiva, one of the 3 gods in the Hindu Trinity. These 3 heads represent 3 essential aspects of Shiva: protection, destruction, and creation. As a representative of the official feminine face of the Catholic Church in India, I have a very serious task ahead of me to expose to you our own story. We have many faces and wear many hats, but I shall stick to the most important three: protection, destruction, and creation. So let's begin at the beginning. I have been asked to speak on sacramental blackmailing. What does that mean in very definite terms? That through the sacrament of ordination, the priest is empowered to manifest God's action in and through the other sacraments he presides over. He cannot use this power for his self-interest. However, we have clergymen who wield this sacrament and the ministry that goes with it to control, to consolidate their chauvinist image, to heighten their prestige and uphold their male superiority. The fiasco played out in our mission workplaces in India, as Nancy has already talked about in the short video that went before, between our sisters and fathers is nothing new. Conflicts occur regarding work, but relationships are affected, which result in power play. This enacted by the clergy, blackmailing the sisters by not agreeing to masses and other sacraments, which is the right of the sisters and the duty of the priests. Let me give you a few examples of gendered power and sexualized violence. You've heard already, because the priest doesn't agree that the sisters conduct their own liturgical service, he locks the tabernacle and keeps the keys, or gives it to the bishop. He uses the pulpit to belittle the sisters for their work in the parish, because in some parishes, the parishioners are much more appreciative of what the sisters are doing. There are times that even bishops connive with their priests against the sisters, openly siding with them when discussing their conflicts with both sides. All a clear display of misuse of sacramental power in many of our convent situations, mostly rural. And what I'm relating are only episodes with the sisters played out repeatedly. I do not bring to you other episodes with other lay parishioners. So my question to you is, what would you do if you were in the place of these sisters? I bring before you some other extreme cases which I think should be exposed. Let's take the Sacrament of Confession. 6 novices are very reluctant to go to their regular professor. They are forced to do so by their directress of novices, who think they need their weekly cleansing. Finally, after much cajoling, they divulge their secret to her, telling her that their confessor is taking advantage of them. As far as I remember, they did not even discuss this with each other, but only shared it with their directress under obedience. What was the result? The 6 young women were dismissed and their confessor transferred and promoted. And this is not an isolated incident where the abuser is promoted. It seems more the norm than the exception. Let's take another example of retreats. In an instance of one retreat, the director would rape his young female retreatants because he wanted to share God's love with them. But the terrible part of this is that he's still appointed to one of the parishes of our city. When he was brought to book, he did not want to go for treatment, was kept isolated in the seminary for 2 to 3 years and now back in action. I sincerely hope not the action described above. And then, of course, we come to the misuse of authority, the alleged rape by a bishop of a former superior general of a congregation, and how the church dragged its feet to take action. It is now sub judice in the courts of Kerala. These last incidents are few and far between, but are shocking nonetheless. However, these are only the ones that have been publicized. There will be many more where the survivors do not talk. How can they? Because they have been taught from young that they cannot talk against Father because he's the face of God. And of course, if they do so, they'll be thrown into hell in the next life. But you can be sure Father will throw them into hell for the rest of their lives here on earth as well. What is more shocking is the way these cases are handled by the church. The church seems unconcerned about the sacramental, economic, and social power soliciting priests can wield over women, and the spiritual health of penitents thus abused. In the case of confession, the solicitation occurred during the confession, in the confessional, or using the sacrament of confession as a pretext. The abusers have to be forgiven, said one bishop. What about the crimes they have committed? Have they not to be punished? Unfortunately, our faithful take what the hierarchies say for gospel truth and try for the rest of their lives to forgive rather than taking it to civil courts. And our church leadership is so blinkered that many don't realize they're the first and foremost under the civil law of the country and then the canon law of the church. They can only see the law they can dispense. So regarding power and the clergy, there's plenty of power being bandied around. Power is used from the pulpit or workplace to humiliate, criticize, and belittle sisters. Power refuses to acknowledge the professional competence of sisters, and the insecurity and patriarchy of our church has put in place structures where women are not only victimized, but also penalized as victims. And now I come to the feminine face of the church. In the past, we women were protected. This feminine face of the church till now has been seen as the quiet, obedient, hardworking, cheap, and often free workforce of the Catholic Church. We were a voiceless lot, or so we were given to understand. And it suited the powers that were to protect us, so we could continue being silent, and yet the meek and humble of heart of the church, and be continually abused without it being considered so. Our present phase is decidedly different from what I have just described. We are coming into our own, which entails a few of us slashing and destroying what is evil in our system, precisely so we can reclaim our dignity. So you can imagine this phase is not much liked, because we challenge the powers that be who are shaken up, who don't enjoy anymore the security they have always enjoyed as the so-called leaders of the church. And we are also voicing our dissent for the culture of silence heard in and practiced in our convents regarding our relationships, roles, and functions in the church. A word on that famous culture of silence which needs to be talked about, despite the fact it is about silence. When the celebrant of the morning service comes to the breakfast table and flirts with a young sister, oftentimes it is ignorant banter, which might at times cross the line, but with no intent to hurt. But there are times our young ladies feel they have been singled out because of some or other feature of theirs. Why I say this is that most times our young recruits don't know how to respond to unwanted advances like the one mentioned. They do not know how to behave in an informed manner with the opposite sex. And thus, if it is something serious enough to be taken to their superiors, they prefer to keep it to themselves, ashamed, feeling guilty for attracting someone's attention, and also helpless. There's a great need for psychosexual development to be added to the syllabus of early formation. Another example. Today, no teacher berated unfairly by a cleric principal will stop from taking it to the internal committee of redressal. Not so a woman religious, not so. Why? Because unlike her lay counterpart, most often her emotional development lags far behind. Our formation is isolated from living milieus and makes the maturation process much slower. And consequently, she doesn't have the skills to reflect on her feelings of anger, disappointment, hurt, guilt to know that she has to take it to another level. But as I have already mentioned, you can't go against the representative of God. How can you? How can that be remedied in the formation when you talk about such things? Through role plays, through rehearsals of all kinds, so that our young people are ready for the real thing when it happens. Another famous example, a former Catholic nun was asked to leave her congregation because she joined in the protests against the bishop mentioned above. Lucy Kalapura claims, I was expelled for my stance against a bishop accused of rape. She was dismissed because she joined a public protest in September 2018 in Kerala, South India, demanding the arrest of Bishop Franco Bulakal of Jalandhar, who was accused of raping a nun. She refused to move out of her Indian convent and appeared in court to argue her need for police protection. The state's High Court ordered interim police protection for her following her complaint of physical threats to her in her convent. During the hearing, lawyers for her congregation brought to the court's notice that the Catholic Church's top adjudicating authority had affirmed her dismission. It meant she was not a member of the congregation anymore. And she did not even have the right and duty to wear its religious habit. She also had no right to live in the convent, they argued. Lucy says, I now use it as an occasion to encourage more and more women to come forward to fight challenges like this. She says thousands of women are struggling without adequate support systems. I want to utilize my challenges to encourage other women to boldly face their challenges, the former nun says. And our third phase, we are creating our future, where we educate ourselves, form ourselves as we are adult and capable of doing so, and we design our own future, which we take into our hands, focusing on our integral growth and creating a healthy ambience for it. Also taking decisions which affect our collective future. So why are we here today talking about this? Because it's our fundamental right to be considered and treated as equals, and we speak about it as a united group of women religious. There's a great need to conscientize sisters about the patriarchal mindset and power, and we have started. But we have also to conscientize ourselves about the rights we have. We have started the preliminary work of formation of sisters regarding feminist theology and gender equality, besides other disciplines, and are insisting that seminary education also be looked into. We are growing in our resolve that we be firm, that we shall decide our own future and our involvement in the Indian Church by and for ourselves. We are adult enough to manage. And one thing is clear, we will not tolerate being enslaved by church authorities and clergy anymore. There is less fear and more calls for end of patriarchy. But for this, we need a new structural support, a structure that will not be controlled by the clergy and the hierarchy. We need to be part of dialogue, collaboration and partnership. We need to participate in decision-making bodies of the church. We need to create fora for dialogue and reconciliation, have written contracts before entering a diocese, have investigation teams for situations of abuse of all kinds, be they economic, spiritual, or sexual. and of course, have improved working conditions for sisters. What I have shared today could not be more spiritual and is what the Ignatian spirituality asks of his followers. What have you done for Christ? Unfortunately, we didn't know better, so we kept ourselves protected. What are we doing for Christ? Destroying what is evil in our church system regarding women religious. And what will we do for Christ? Create our own, our own future. Having said that, I would also like to say to the clergy that to have this structural support, it's high time you left your male superiority and need for patriarchal control and prestige behind, and thought of mutual respect and communion. Until now, there have been signs of change, but only on paper. Now, it is time for you, hierarchy included, to undertake a serious discernment regarding your relationship with the sisters you work with. Develop an attitude of respect towards your sister colleagues and stop your abuse. We are very clear about our role in the church. Some have told me the authorities, try to suppress the truth. But if we women do not speak, the stones themselves will cry out. So you see, we are rising. Like bread, we are rising. Against all odds, women religious are rising into speech, into power, into significance, and into the future. Thank you.
Big applause, Nuella. Strong, and yes, women are rising and women religious are even more rising. Thank you. Strong voice. Thank you. We move on to Mary Johnson, a former nun, atheist, humanist, friend, and author. Mary's memoir, An Unquenchable Thirst, makes crystal clear the reality of spiritual abuse within our Roman Catholic institution. While listening, I bought the Audible version with Mary's original voice. I too was struck again and again by where we Catholics keep turning a blind eye or looking the other way, even though we are intelligent and adult enough to recognize the political maneuvering and sometimes criminal behavior of certain individuals in our church. Mary, your voice and compassionate criticism are more than necessary to make it clear that even saints have their thoughts, and that this angry focus on suffering in the church must stop, because it is demoralizing and sickening, not only for those who serve the church, but ultimately for the Catholic religion as a whole. I'm very honored to have you with us, Mary. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chantal, for the invitation to speak with you today.
You have to demute.
I think I am demuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. So thank you for this invitation to speak with you today. This isn't going to be easy for me. We're going to be talking about gender-based violence as it relates to religious vows. This isn't an easy topic. Before we go on, I invite all of us to pause, to look within for a moment, to see what we feel when we anticipate the next few minutes of listening to me talk about abuse of vows and gender-based violence. Have you experienced violence, spiritual, psychological, even physical, in the ways you and your community live the vows? How does that make you feel? How do you feel hearing from someone who has not only left religious life, but also left the church and religious faith? How do you feel listening to someone who knew Mother Teresa personally? I mean, let's face it, for women religious, Mother Teresa comes with a lot of baggage. For my part, I feel a great deal of ambivalence about talking with you all. I often don't feel welcome in Catholic spaces. I've been vilified in the conservative press and within the community to which I gave 20 years of my life. My sisters forbidden to read my story. Despite having left religious life nearly 24 years ago, having engaged in extensive therapy, having written a book about my experiences, worked on the production of a podcast that tells my story and that of several other former missionaries of charity, I know that talking with you today about my experiences with the MCs will mean that I will have nightmares tonight. Perhaps even more challenging to me, I'm talking with you, a group dedicated to 16 days of activism against gender-based violence within the Catholic Church. But I'm not at all sure that real reform for women is likely within a church where men hold all the power. Yet I accepted this invitation from Chantal and Susanna to speak to you. It seems to me that Voices of Faith is a group willing to look honestly at what's really happening within the church, and honesty is no small thing. Perhaps my experience and my thoughts can be useful. Let's try. Yesterday, you heard the compelling testimony of Anna Adamchikova, formerly Sister Damiana of the Missionaries of Charity. Like Anna, I was drawn to the radical nature of the MCs. It was 1977, I was 19 and up for a meaningful challenge, a way to give everything to God. Radical religious life can be very seductive. Even today, the communities most severe in their interpretations of the vows are the ones that most frequently prove attractive to young people. The young are looking for something different, countercultural, compelling. Young people are often uncompromising, which has a certain power, but also many dangers. Young people haven't yet learned to temper idealism with gentleness, compassion, and wisdom. At 19, I loved God and felt a call to live a life of service. I was attracted to the poverty of Jesus, who had no place to lay his head, who did not store earthly treasures, who, like the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, relied on his heavenly Father. I longed for obedience to lead me to service. Chastity wasn't something I desired specifically, but it came as part of the package, and I was up for that. I felt drawn to a life in community, a mission and life with sisters with whom I could share everything. What I didn't know was that radical poverty, chastity, and obedience, while they promised a unique closeness to God, could lead to death. I know religious sisters like many of you on this call, sisters who live poverty, chastity, and obedience in ways that have caused them to flourish and grow. And they've made their work glow with authenticity. I think of the congregations of many women religious in the United States where I live. These sisters took the Second Vatican Council's call to renewal seriously, engaging in study and prayer, discussions, experiments, revisions. They lost many members in the process. Many of those who remained became vibrant, effective witnesses to the gospel. For their efforts, they were rewarded by the hierarchical church with an extensive apostolic visitation meant to intimidate them. But we're here today to talk not about the trials and glories of sisters who engaged so fruitfully in renewal. We're here to talk about the ways religious vows can be abused in hopes that those abuses can cease. In the most severe cases, like those Anna talked about yesterday, abuse led our sisters to attempt and to kill themselves by suicide. In less severe cases, radical poverty can lead to illness. Radical obedience can lead to the crushing of intellectual growth, the loss of creative contribution, and to crippling emotional abuse. Radical chastity leaves vibrant, energetic women to rot in their own little cages of loneliness. Let me give you a few examples from my experience as an MC from 1977 to 1997. Other congregations will have their own examples to add to the list. In the MCs, abuse of vows is rooted in two basic spiritual missteps. The first is to equate harder with better. The second is to equate the rules and the superior's command as the voice of God. The spirituality of the MCs is rooted in Jesus on the cross and began with a vision in which Mother Teresa claims to have experienced Jesus' cry, "I thirst," as a call to give up all and follow him into the slums, to serve him in the poorest of the poor. The MC's aim, and here I quote from the Constitutions, is to quench the infinite thirst of Jesus Christ on the cross for love of souls by the profession of the evangelical counsels and wholehearted and free service to the poorest of the poor, according to the Constitutions. Thus, tying the vows to the suffering Christ, Mother would often tell us, "You are the spouse of Jesus crucified." On the cross, Jesus is in extremis. He lived that for a few hours. As Mother Teresa understood it, she and her sisters were to live those extremes of suffering every day, every moment, loving Jesus as he had never been loved before. By their nature, the vows have renunciation at their heart. When you add an element of spiritual grandiosity, you arrive at an attitude that says, the greater the renunciation, the holier the act. So, for missionaries of charity, here are just a few of the practices applauded for their extreme interpretation of poverty. Eating whatever was begged or received, often including spoiled food. Spending hours mending the 2 or 3 sets of clothes given each sister for her use, patch upon patch, for habit and sorry. Each sister washing those patched clothes by hand, bent over a bucket, and leaving them to dry in the open air each time she changed. Washing the clothes and bedding of those under their care by hand as well, engaged in countless hours of laundry while the needs of the poor waited. Having no privacy, sleeping in common dormitories on cots with homemade mattresses, praying only in prescribed ways at prescribed times, mostly with vocal prayers, always together into chapel, no privacy, even when it came to your own prayer life, eating every meal together in a common refectory. Limiting contact with family to once-a-month letters and 2 weeks of home visits once every 10 years. Chastity was also interpreted in extreme ways. All communication with the outside world, except that once-a-month home letter, was prohibited, including talking with lay co-workers about anything other than work, talking with one's own sisters outside the appointed times, never talking about personal matters with one's sisters, except with one's superior, where one was invited to reveal as much about one's interior life as possible, with a near complete lack of the spiritual freedom today's video highlights as the right of each sister. Touching was strictly prohibited except when absolutely necessary. For example, Mother would tell us that we could pick up the babies to feed or to change them, but when the feeding or changing was done, we must immediately put those babies down, as holding a baby could lead to attachment. One was never to touch another sister, nor to hug her on the day of her profession or her feast day, or to offer a pat on the arm when she was having a hard day. The only exception was to care for the sick. I think you can see that MCs took the misstep, the harder the better, very seriously when it came to chastity and to poverty. When we get to obedience, the harder the better still stands. But the second misstep, equating the rules and the superior's commands as the voice of God, is even more in evidence. Except in rare cases when a sister was in so much distress that Mother Teresa might ask, "Sister, what sort of work or which community might help you?" MCs were never allowed to voice an opinion on the work they preferred or felt called to. And if a sister was noticed to be happy in her work, it was very likely that work would be assigned to someone else very soon. Sisters who had trained as doctors and nurses were routinely given work in the kitchen or laundry or teaching the children so that they might not become proud. Sisters were frequently humiliated in public for perceived failure or just to keep them in their place. We were advised to always remain silent before an accusation, allowed to respond with only 5 words. Thank you, sister. Sorry, sister. I could go on. There's a common saying, not in the MCs, but in popular culture in the United States, anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This isn't true. Anything that doesn't kill you doesn't kill you. We aren't promised anything more than that. being continually undermined, mocked, and bullied, with your only defense to stand silent before your accuser as Jesus stood silent before Pilate, can drain all the spirit out of you. Let's return for a moment to the overarching theme of these 16 days of activism, gender-based violence. Unlike the report we heard from Sister Nancy and Sister Nuella about priests abusing their sacramental power, the abuse I'm talking about doesn't come to sisters so much from the men outside their communities, but from the women, traditions, and rules within their own communities. We're talking about women living and enforcing the vows in ways that are violent, manipulative, and abusive. How is this gender-based violence? Because sisters have inherited religious life within a patriarchy, and that comes with all sorts of gender-based assumptions. Women are meant to serve. They are meant to be seen and not heard. Their main virtues are to be kindness and patience, because those are the virtues that will keep them silent. Women are meant to sacrifice themselves. As part of the Vatican's delegation to the United Nations International Women's Year Conference of 1975, Mother Teresa insisted the greatness of women lies in their loving others, not themselves. Never mind that Jesus said to love others as oneself. Matthew records that Jesus told his disciples, "Take up your cross and follow me." But Jesus didn't go around seeking suffering. He accepted crucifixion when it came, but he didn't look for it. I prefer these words of Jesus. "I came that you may have life and have it to the full." Like those who have gone before us, we can choose life or we can choose death. Let us choose life. Let us choose flourishing, not only for the unborn, but for each of us, for each religious congregation. As you all seek to address abuse within the church, you are going to have to do some internal work. The simple fact is that every religious woman who has dedicated herself to serve God within the Catholic Church loves the church. Simultaneously, the church she loves abuses her over and over again. A woman who finds herself in an abusive marriage has many complexities to work out, many competing loyalties to balance. What is the effect on the children of staying, of leaving? How long can she survive within the marriage? Is surviving enough, or does she hope to flourish? Let us consider the words of Malcolm Gladwell, quoted on the Voices of Faith website. Activism that challenges the status quo, that attacks deeply rooted problems, is not for the faint of heart. I would revise Gladwell's words for this occasion. Activism that challenges the church, that attacks deeply rooted problems in place for centuries and sanctified by tradition, is not for the faint of heart. I might revise even further. Activism that challenges an abuser to whom one has tied her own fortunes is for the strong. The Second Vatican Council's decree on religious life is titled Perfecta Caritatis, perfect love. A genuine religious life has love at its core, not renunciation, not discipline, not sacrifice, love. But not perfect love. The demand for perfection keeps women in cages. This is true in any walk of life. Women are to have the perfect body, to be the perfect mother, to exist in perfect love. Let's not aim for perfection, but for an imperfect love that grows stronger every day. What kind of love? I do believe in patience and in kindness, but let me close with my thoughts about the kind of love sturdy enough for the activism you women and men are setting about today. Love is ancient. Love is wild. Love is honest. Love is true. Love defends. Love protects. Love dances. Love laughs. Love takes risks. Love sings. Love does not keep quiet in the face of wrong, but shouts the truth for all to hear. Steeples will fall. Churches will crumble. Popes and pomp will pass away. But love grows stronger in a fight. Love breathes new life into a weary world. Love endures. Thank you.
Mary, you leave us speechless. Thank you. Thank you. The church she loves is abusing her again and again. Yeah. Thank you. We go to Virginia Saldana, activist, feminist, theologian, and writer. She has occupied positions for the empowerment of women at the diocesan, national, and continental level in the Indian Church, and taken up thorny issues of justice and the sex abuse of women. Virginia takes the role tonight, this morning, depending where you are, to challenge now a little bit the two women who just spoke before her, Sister Nuella and Mary Johnson, on the issue we're trying to tackle today. Please, Virginia.
Thank you, Chantal and Voices of Faith, for inviting me here to respond not just to Nuella and to Mary, but I think to all religious sisters who are present over here, particularly the leaders. On the first day, Doris Reschinger spoke about the human rights of women religious. Shouldn't congregations begin to examine their culture from the lens of human rights today? I think it's high time we began to work in the church within the framework of human rights, not canon law, because canon law has been articulated by men for men, whereas human rights is for everybody. The sharing of Nuella and Mary showed that in the Catholic Church, since the clergy and congregational leaders have all the power over sisters, especially spiritual, and in understanding their vows, they have the capacity to really make the lives of the sisters miserable. All abuse can be spiritualized, whether it is making a sister do something that is unnecessarily challenging, humanly uncomfortable, or manipulative, as in the case of sex abuse. The interpretation of vows of sisters force them to obey what they may have doubts about as undesirable, distasteful, or even wrong. With regard to the vow of chastity, I have doubts whether many sisters break these vows deliberately, or whether they have been manipulated or coerced into situations that make them believe that they want the sex. I have a book that was sent to me when I wrote the first article about sex abuse of women in the church way back in 2010, sent to me by this Canadian sister who was a missionary in Africa, about her abuse by a priest during a retreat. And he was supposed to be one of the best retreat preachers in that part of Africa. After reading her book, I came to realize how a priest can manipulate a sister to do what he wants. I am convinced that there cannot be consensual sex between two people of unequal power, because the person in power, especially a spiritual director who knows his client very well, can be shrewdly manipulative. From the story shared by Nuella, which is a similar case to this sister, I feel it is almost like the priests have a secret manual for abuse being circulated among themselves. Perhaps we need to have an abuse of power blog where women can post their experiences of abuse of power. I want to emphasize that no sister has had sex with a priest should ever believe that the sex was consensual. From the different experiences I have heard, the clergy manipulate their victim to believe so, but in reality, it is not. The culture of silence is widespread because of the way women are socialized in the church. They have a great fear of repercussion from the powerful, clerics or hierarchy. Socialization of women from a young age who are taught not to challenge a person who is in a position of authority over them, especially if he is a male and a priest. A sister cannot go against the priest. The image of the priest as that of another Christ is so strong that people are willing to condone his flirtations, misbehavior as moments of weakness that should be forgiven. Yet the sister who makes an issue of her abuse ends up being punished with dismissal. Can congregations become more sensitive to women? Why are congregational leaders so anti-women? I think we need to have write up an examination of conscience for all congregational leaders. Have I been anti-woman today in my exercise of power and authority? Today, sex abuse or even harassment is a crime in civil society. But in the church, it is looked upon as a misdemeanor and a sin that needs to be forgiven and forgotten. Right now, religious congregations of women seem to be more interested in protecting the clergy and hierarchy rather than their own sisters. This has to change. I think we really have to work hard at making this change come about. We also need to ask for a change in the understanding of ordination that makes a priest another Christ who is revered as such. All of us are baptized into Christ. All of us represent Christ to the world. Why only an ordained priest? All of us have a mission to be Christ to the world. We have to question this theology of priesthood and see that it changes. Does religious formation infantilize our sisters? This is another question I think that we need to examine. In what way is religious formation making sisters become like little children? There's a great need to create awareness among sisters today. Many religious women's congregations run education institutions. What is preventing them from having gender studies and awareness programs conducted in these institutions as an extracurricular subject? They should be teaching all girls women's studies and empowerment at the school level. They need to have the courage to take a stand to do this. Nuella gives good suggestions to bring about changes in structured support. But sisters, religious sisters, have to be unanimous that all want a change in structures, which will be done by sisters and not by the clergy and hierarchy. Unless religious women go the way of their American counterparts following Vatican II, when the LCWR, the Leadership of Women Religious, went ahead and did what they felt the Spirit was leading them to do. I think I've spoken about this quite often, even to the sisters in India. Follow the LCWR. They withdrew themselves from servitude under clergy and hierarchy and began to serve people in small groups. They drew a lot of support from lay associates, sometimes even entire families. They might have received some brickbats from some sections of lay people. But if you feel in your heart and your conscience, you are doing what God is calling you to do, that should be good enough. When God is with you, who can be against you? Of course, it will take a lot of uncertainty, insecurity, but faith in the call you feel deep down is good enough. I can say this from my own experience. There is a section of religious sisters who did not join the LCWR in the US. The hierarchy is happy to drive a wedge between the two groups, but the LCWR did not let it happen. So we sisters can be in solidarity really if we want to. The important thing is to follow the promptings of the Holy Spirit, to listen to God's voice speaking to us. Should a congregation take away a woman's capacity to grow into fullness by being a responsible adult, has she to be made a child again, having to take permission, having to take orders, having to give an account of every movement of hers? A community of adults should be run on mutual trust and responsibility, like a family with adult children. They inform when they will be home late, when they will be out for a meal, and inform when they will be, where they will be, just in case anything happens. They contribute responsibly to the house by way of work and finance. But domination and control is a complete no. Should there be a redefining of the vows? Call it obedience to God, poverty, to live simply so that others may simply live, chastity, to be faithful to my commitment without any distractions of sensual attachments, not just friendships. Since love and service to people is a gospel imperative, which draws many young people to religious life, can we think of new ways in which we can tap this energy of young people instead of corralling them into an institution? Can we find new ways of channeling their energy to work in communities? Without the burden of crippling authority and interpretation of vows. In the church, gender relations are extremely unequal, and women, especially women religious, are vulnerable to abuse because of the superiority of the male. This has to change. All women have to join together to find ways to overcome this inequality. And I'm very grateful that Voices of Faith has taken this initiative. They have also, given birth to the Council of Catholic Women, which is going ahead to have a Synod of Women next year, where we hope to draw in lots more solidarity to speak up for the change we want to see in the church. All women, all of us have to join together to overcome this inequality and abuse that takes place because of this inequality. And as Mary said, let us all choose the fullness of life that Jesus came to give us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia, for responding powerfully to these powerful speeches. As Chantal said, I feel quite speechless after all you said. And there are so many issues that struck me in your speeches. For example, this combination that you, I think, a little bit talked in each of speech, that religious sisters live in no intimacy as they are controlled, but still in isolation. And I think the honest and free spiritual life should be the opposite. It should give you space for loneliness, for being with your own, but still in healthy openness to other people. I was wondering, could you comment this a little bit? Is there any way religious sisters and we women can overcome this isolation, can build this solidarity really effectively? Because the thing we are hearing mostly from religious sisters, but also from Catholic women, is that, oh, I had no idea that the woman just next to me, in the next room, in the next chair in the church, has the same problems. How can we, talk to more people than those who are in this meeting? Sister Nuella, perhaps can you start? You need to unmute yourself.
You talk of solidarity and how we can expand this to more people. I think that's very important. In India, we have a network of sisters from around the country who come together every few weeks to talk about what to do. This is after the study. How can we take the follow-up of the study further and to all parts of the country? Obviously, the church in different parts of the country are more progressive or less progressive or more conservative and things like that. It's difficult. It's difficult because here we are 90,000 sisters. It's a mammoth task, but we have started. And we hope to have small local bodies in the different parts of the country, which will take it forward. Basically, we have 15 zones. We have to organize things further in that light. Mary, I don't know if you'd like to say something on that.
I don't have anything to say particularly about what the sisters might do as a group. I think all these different organizational ideas are great and very needed. But I would go back a little bit to the beginning of Susanna's question, where she was talking about just regular, normal friendship and intimacy with the sisters with whom you live. And I think many congregations do actually have that. When I speak of my experience, I realize that it's certainly not the experience of every sister, and many religious communities are much more open, much more healthy, much more helping their people to grow. But those who hesitate, those who are in fear, just get rid of that idea of perfection. I think that's where we can get really hung up. We want to live a perfect chastity, so we keep ourselves in these little boxes and don't really share what's inside of us out of fear of getting too close. I think we just have to let ourselves make mistakes, let ourselves try the best we can, and grow, become real human beings, flourishing people who are really able to to reach that fullness through each other. I think it's really important.
You want me to answer, Susanna?
Yes, if you want to add something. Yeah.
Yeah, building solidarity is different, is a little bit difficult because women in the church are at different levels. Take, for instance, my own parish. I mean, the women in my parish, they believe the priests more. And, when people like me are there, the priests take extra trouble to tell people, be careful of her, she's dangerous. You see, and people really see me as dangerous. So, they have so much of power that they can manipulate people's thinking. And it's only the more enlightened ones that are able to see through this. The majority of people are just happy, like I think among our group, we say they are consumers in the church. They're just happy consumers in the church. They think that as long as they consume whatever services the priests have to give them, their path to heaven is assured. And that's what they want. So people like me are demons on the way, so they'd rather ignore me. So, but hopefully that we can get more and more women conscientized. Like I say, this should start at the school level, and our religious sisters are in charge of education institutions. They can do it. They can do it. Why don't they do it? That's my challenge to religious sisters.
Sister Nuella, you wanted to add something?
I just want to add something. It's true, it sounds like a beautiful organization. But we have to, because we're dealing with such numbers, we have to look for the best delivery system where we can reach most sisters. Sisters who are in trouble, sisters who are progressive, who can help others. So we have so, as I've said before, the task is mammoth, but we're trying. And I have a lot of hope that we'll reach slowly but surely. Yeah.
I was very much moved, Mary, by what you said, that this meeting will costs you a lot. And yet you don't have probably much hope for Catholic Church as a place where people can stop being abused. So first of all, I would like to thank you, because it's I guess it's easier for someone who is still in the institution to push for changes than for you. And I would like to say that we appreciate this so much. And I want to ask you whether in the ideal version, you imagine possible religious life without all this, without this sacrilege of abusing vows, whether there is any form of religious life that you would believe in.
That's an interesting question, Susanna. I'm in a completely different place in my life now, but I can imagine so many different forms of religious life. And there are many different forms that exist even now. There are congregations that renew their vows every year. And so there's never any final vows. You can always kind of opt out, which would make things so much easier in so many different ways. There are groups where just people gather together with a common mission without a whole bunch of rules and a whole bunch of regulations and limitations. I mean, that's possible. Those things exist now. I do think that if you are going to be a group of sisters within the Catholic Church, you have to be very firmly rooted in what your animated video referred to, the conscience, that innermost sanctuary where a person is alone in her heart with whatever it is she sees as, ultimate reality. And that necessity of human rights that Virginia talked about as opposed to canon law. I mean, if you want to have a real vital life of any sort, place it within your humanity, not within a legal system developed by men who are determined to hold on to their power, and who, many of them, just kind of because of their upbringing and because of their privilege, are just kind of unaware and unable to enter in a compassionate way into the experience of the women who are serving the church. So yes, leave aside those canonical regulations and adopt that more free-spirited, I would suppose, way where one can really rely more on one's conscience than on the rules.
Yeah, that seems very wise. Sister Nuella, you obviously have some more influence perhaps on religious life, and some more optimism also. And I would like to ask you about this sacrilege you were talking about, and Mary was talking also about, that people are treating, or we faithful, we tend to treat priest's voice or superior voice as voice of God. How to de-learn this, how to learn this back, how to stop thinking like this for our practical life in everyday prayer, everyday meetings.
In this world of fast changes and technology, I wonder who's the voice of God? I mean, in this age and time, to even think that one person is the face of God, is the voice of God, it makes no sense to me. When you discern with so many different factors. It's not only one person telling you. It's not your superior telling you. Your superior is informed only in a certain perspective. And that is where the abuse comes in when young people join. They are not told beforehand what is happening in the congregation. They only hear their superiors talking, voice of God. And they come in and there's such a mess in their lives later. I think that's all I can say at the moment. I know that the videos that Voices of Faith have developed are very powerful. And I'm really grateful to that, because we will definitely disseminate them as much as possible to teach our young people what is ahead of them. Before a marriage, you go to prenuptial courses in India. Everybody has to attend that before they get married. I don't know about the rest of the world. Well, why not for religious women also? They need to know what's happening, and a very, what should I say, a very balanced point of view. No voice of God there. No voice of God at all.
Thank you, Sister Nuella. Virginia, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I feel that our faith has been taught to us wrong. We have to relearn our faith from a correct perspective. Like, for instance, how many of us are aware that every baptized Catholic is equal in dignity to the clergy, to religious? Every one of us are equal because we are all baptized into the body of Christ. And that is what makes us equal. We are one body of Christ. No one, and Pope Francis is reinforcing that thought now during this synodal process. We have to really think our faith. The trouble is we have inherited a theology that comes from the past that is rooted in monarchy and hierarchy. We have to really relearn our faith from the perspective of the Gospels, where Jesus came that all may have life, have it abundantly. No one can crush somebody else. So that has to happen. That really has to happen, the relearning of our faith. And that is why we are having the kind of crisis we are having today. Young people are just not finding any meaning in the church. They don't want to come back to church. They find no meaning in the rituals or anything, but the old people have learned to survive on those rituals. And that's our problem. So for me, I really feel that we have to take the trouble. And I think that is the onus should on women again. Women theologians are the ones who are bringing out the real message of Jesus for women, how Jesus liberated women 2000 years ago. So we women have to do that. We have to give more women theologians a voice in the church.
Thank you, Virginia. I also want to give thanks to Sister Nancy, who I know is in the audience, for your courageous video at the beginning. If you, Sister, no pressure, but if you want to add any comment to what has been said, you feel free to do so. Please unmute yourself before.
I would join Nuella, Virginia, Mary in calling for in calling all religious to unite, to come together, to bring in that we may voice what we experience, that we take our religious life seriously, and to come out of the, not allow ourselves to be abused, to be taken advantage of. I think it's high time. And as you, on the very first day, it's what I said. Now, let's begin to be more, to take our religious lives more seriously, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Nancy. And thank you once again, Sister Nuella, Mary, Virginia. It was really a powerful session, thanks to you. And we were honored to listen to you and to all your insights. Also in the chat, there are many comments. They are not questions. They're just applaud you. And so I would like to thank you in the name of, I guess, all our audience, and definitely in the name of Voices of Faith team. Thank you so much.